Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here today. I'm truly excited to introduce our speaker. Dr. Joy Howell is a pediatric critical care physician and educator at New York Presbyterian Weill Cornell Medicine. She earned her medical degree from the State University of New York Health Science Center at Brooklyn, completed her pediatric residency at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and her fellowship at Weill Cornell Medicine. A former program director for the Pediatric Critical Care Medicine Fellowship, Dr. Howell has been recognized with multiple awards for excellence in teaching and simulation-based education. As Vice Chair of Diversity in Pediatrics and Assistant Dean of Diversity in Student Life at Weill Cornell Medicine, she leads initiatives to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and health equity while supporting students from underrepresented backgrounds and fostering institutional change through national collaborations. Please join me in giving her a warm welcome. I will now pass it over to her.
Thank you, Christina, for that warm introduction, and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm appreciative to the organizers of PreMedCC for the invitation. And my hope is that to share a little bit of my journey, as well as an overview of the medical school application process, with the hopes that it'll inform your decision-making going forward, and add value to the process. Let me just make sure I have my screen set up appropriately. Bear with me.
Perfect.
Okay, very good. And I'm seeing a quiz on my screen. Is that me or?
That's for everyone, just to
Okay.
do demographic and feedback.
Okay.
Cool.
All right. So what I want to do is just share a little bit of my journey. If we call that part A, then give an overview of the medical school application process, part B, and then open the floor to any questions you may have. I'm certainly going to do my best to answer all of your questions. If there's a question that anyone poses to me that I'm unable to answer, then what I pledge to do is get the answer, and I'll circle back with Mr. Afshar and with the organizers of today's event. All right, and I'm going to ask Christina or Eva if you all are able to watch the chat. Certainly, if there are questions that people have along the way, please feel free to raise your virtual hand or unmute yourself and pose your questions. Okay, so just a little bit about myself. I'm a first-generation physician. My family, my parents immigrated from Barbados in the late 1960s. For those of you who don't know, Barbados is a small island in the Caribbean, some 21 square miles. I come from a middle-class family. In Barbados, my mother was a seamstress and my father worked for an undertaker. And then after they were married and they decided that they wanted to start their family in the United States, my father transitioned to working with merchant ships, shipping goods from Barbados to the United States and different parts of the world. And he touched cities along the East Coast and decided that New York is where they were going to take up residence. My father's first job was working as part of the cleaning staff in a hospital. Then he transitioned to working as part of the cleaning staff, the custodial staff of a New York City public school. And after my mother came, he was able to facilitate her getting a job. And so both of my parents, throughout all of their time employed in the United States, worked as members of the custodial staff in New York City public schools. I am public school educated from kindergarten all the way through the end of medical school. I went to Pablo Casal's junior high school, and then from there transitioned into LaGuardia High School. The technical name is LaGuardia High School of Music and the Performing Arts. In Pablo Casal's middle school, I learned to play the violin. I knew from 8th grade, from the time I dissected a frog, that I wanted to become a physician. And so growing up in the Bronx, it stands to reason that I would attend one of the 3 New York City science schools. I took the test for those science schools. My performance was good enough to gain me entry into Brooklyn Technical High School, but not good enough to get me into Stuyvesant, the most competitive of the 3, nor was it good enough to get me into Bronx High School of Science. And so the calculus of my parents was that since LaGuardia High School had great academics, it was located in Manhattan, which is closer to the Bronx than Brooklyn, that would be where I went to school. And I did well at LaGuardia, and it was by virtue of the fact that my mother worked in a public school in middle school. Some of those teachers and guidance counselors had her ear and were giving her advice even after I left that middle school while I was in high school. And it was through those teachers in middle school that my mom learned of the Sophie Davis program, the Sophie Davis School of Biomedical Education, which was a program at the City University of New York. At the time, it was a 7-year BSMD program. And so I obtained a Bachelor of Science from the City University of New York, and then transitioned into the 3rd year of the State University of New York Health Science Center at Brooklyn. So as I mentioned a moment ago, my K through 12, as well as undergraduate and medical education, were all at public institutions. Somewhere along the line, I knew that I wanted to do pediatrics. That was just reaffirmed in the latter part of medical school. And once I graduated from SUNY Downstate, I did my pediatric residency at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And then I returned to New York Presbyterian, where I did my pediatric critical care medicine fellowship. And never in my life did I anticipate that I would spend the majority of my career at one institution. But after finishing my fellowship at New York Presbyterian, specifically the Cornell campus of New York Presbyterian, I became a faculty member at Cornell. Now, the first few years of my faculty tenure, I was based at New York Presbyterian Queens. That's the hospital listed here, pictured here on the right. And I was serving as the site director for a brand new pediatric ICU. But after about 5 years, I transitioned to the main campus and began serving as the fellowship program director for the Pediatric Critical Care Medicine Fellowship. And these are practically baby pictures. I'm looking at these and I'm guessing that these are somewhere around 2005, which is like eons ago. It's scary how old this picture is. But this is a picture of me setting up an infant mannequin and then a child-sized mannequin, because simulation education has evolved into a standard for graduate medical education. And if you were to ask me where much of my scholarship was as a faculty member, it's around simulation education. It became a very important part of the fellowship training. And it is said that imitation is the strongest form of flattery. One of the sayings that I was known for during my time as fellowship program director was that if you fail to prepare, you prepare to fail. And that is a truth that can be applied in the pediatric ICU, but it can be applied well beyond the clinical setting to life and to any of our dreams and aspirations. We have to prepare and plan if we intend to succeed. So I became fellowship program director in about 2005. In 2017, I was invited to serve as my department's vice chair for diversity, overseeing diversity strategic planning with a focus on the climate and education, on workforce development, and on community engagement. And then shortly thereafter, about 2020, I was invited to serve as Assistant Dean for Student Diversity. Now, since that time, given the socio-political climate, the name of my role has changed, but the essence of my role remains the same. It is to promote belonging and inclusion for students who are recruited into Weill Cornell, and to promote belonging and inclusion within members of the pediatric community. One of the areas of innovation that I've brought to the medical education space since taking on the role of assistant dean is a medical Spanish course that we've offered for the past 4 years. So if you were to ask, who am I professionally as of 2025, I remain a senior member of the Division of Pediatric Critical Care Medicine. I'm a very proud clinician educator. That's who I am at heart. My leadership roles are in the educational and diversity space, and outside of medicine, I've been involved in mentorship and as well as medical missions. One of the most gratifying parts of my work is overseeing the Travelers Summer Research Fellowship, and I should update my slides. As of June 30th this year, the name of the program is no longer Travelers, but the Weill Cornell Medicine Summer Research Fellowship. And I see that as gratifying work because it affords me the opportunity to empower the next generation of healthcare professionals. So you all probably have been in very austere areas of your undergraduate institutions and seen portraits of revered individuals. And you may wonder, do I belong? Can I see myself here? And I have to give credit to 2 of the Travelers participants from a couple of years ago who took it upon themselves to take a picture besides this portrait. And I just thought it was brilliant and invited a handful more students out to take a similar picture. And then captured here is the entire cohort of participants in the Summer Research Fellowship. And since that time, every year we take a group fit photo next to that portrait. Another accomplishment that I'm proud of is the launch of the institution's first, and at the time only, post-baccalaureate research education program to help facilitate the building of a strong foundation for individuals who are going to pursue MD, PhD, or PhD training. And again, related to the current socio-political climate, that program has been terminated by the NIH. Functionally, I'm considering it a pause because I am looking for ways to resume the program. And then outside of medicine, outside of my professional work, I serve as the leader of my church's medical missionary team. And what was it? It was last week that we were in Grenada serving. We've been in existence since about 2010. 2015, and this is our 10th anniversary. And so if I were to leave you with some themes, I would say, don't despise small beginnings. The purpose for me sharing with you information about my parents and their occupations was to let you know that you can feel as if you're coming from a pretty obscure place, but if you're willing to work hard, deliver excellence in all you do, then there's no stopping you. There's no limits on how much you can achieve. Your longevity and resilience in medicine is going to be impacted by finding or identifying things that you're passionate about. For me, that was education. And of late, I would say within the past 5 or so years, I've learned from my trainees that it's important to be intentional about wellness, because again, that is how you build longevity in these professional spaces. I'm going to pause here and see if anybody has any questions. Is there anything in the chat, Christina or Eva?
Yeah, so I'll start at the the earliest question. Someone asked, what programs does Cornell offer for undergraduate students interested in attending Cornell?
Okay. So we have several. I could answer that question now, but I wonder if it makes sense for me to just go through some of the nuts and bolts of the medical school application process. What would you all prefer? I'm happy to take questions at this point.
Yeah, just go through your talk and then yeah, whatever you're comfortable doing. We're
Okay.
pretty
So let's put a pin in that and then I'll come back to it. So just so I have a sense, roughly how many of the individuals in attendance, how many of you are first years or college freshmen? If you could raise your virtual hands.
So we actually took a little survey. So 34% are first or second years, 39% are third and fourth years, 16% are graduate, 9% are postbacks,
Okay.
and 2% are faculty or staff.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. That helps me.
And
So
90% are interested in medicine. The breakdown of so it's actually more updated. 23% first year, 27% second year, third year 11, fourth year 11, fifth year 5, graduates are 16, postbacks are 7, faculty and are 2%.
all right, thank you. That helps me. So if I did my math correctly, about 50% of the audience are first and second years.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So this for the third and fourth years and for the postbacks, you may know some of this already. But this is hopefully will be informative for the junior members of the audience. And again, I'm happy to take any questions folks may have. So crudely speaking, the three components of medical school application are the primary application that's kind of universal across schools that are accredited by the Liaison Committee for Medical Education. Then there's the secondary application, which is specific to individual schools where there may be school-specific essays and school-specific prompts that you have to provide additional information for. And then the third component for those who are successful in securing an interview would be said interview. And in terms of the primary application, here is where you need to prepare. And honestly, the preparation begins from the day you step into undergraduate school. Nowadays, the overwhelming majority of medical school applicants take gap years. When I was a pre-med, it was non-traditional for someone to take a gap year, but now it's not traditional to go straight through. But you have the option of going straight through if you begin preparing your portfolio from day one of undergrad. And what do I mean by that? I mean, have you completed all of the science prerequisites and done well in your science classes? So one of the key metric that's used to evaluate applicants for medical school is the science GPA. So biology, chemistry, physics, and mathematics. That's the BCPM. And the AAMC website will help you calculate your science GPA if that's needed. In addition, how you perform on the medical college admission test or the MCAT is a key academic metric. Now, these days, we are striving to be comprehensive, to be holistic in how we evaluate students. And so we're not just looking for those who got the 4.0 or the 520 MCAT score, we are looking to see, are you a citizen of your undergraduate institution? Are you a good citizen in your community? Have you been engaged in mentoring those coming up behind you? Have you participated in any teams or any group activities? Have you ascended to any leadership roles? Do you have any clinical exposure, meaning shadowing, or better yet, clinical experience, like paid employment as an EMT or a medical scribe? Have you engaged in research? All of these are important components of the portfolio of the strong medical school applicant. In addition to your activities, have you experienced anything in life that sensitizes you to the needs of members of the US population, and in particular to underserved populations? Part of the primary application is a personal statement where you get to, in your own voice, craft a narrative that explains why you are pursuing medicine and ideally explains what you hope to bring to the field of healthcare. And you want to be careful to start working on your personal statement early, have it read and reviewed by trusted mentors and advisors. You want to refrain from any political or controversial statements. You want to refrain from editorializing on any common or current events. Make sure that your facts are correct, and just make sure that the tone is appropriate. Then there's the secondary application, which again is school specific. You'll get to answer why Cornell. There's a challenge essay where you get to speak to any hardship that you've overcome. You get to speak to what you have been doing during your gap year, and you definitely want to speak to how your experiences inform sensitivity to the needs of the US population or some subset of the US population, and how it informs the type of physician you'd like to be. Nowadays, we're probably moving away from how COVID has affected individuals. And this is a graphic from the AAMC that tries to convey the holistic approach we're taking to review of medical school applications. I mentioned already that your academic metrics are very important. Fortunately, it's not the only component, but they are very important. And quite honestly, given the current socio-political climate, I think I worry that the aperture on this lens may narrow, but for the time being, we also look at attributes and experiences that again inform the sensitivities that you may have to different components of the US population. In terms of your extracurricular activities, these are those that I listed before: your citizenship in your school, service to the community, any team or group activities, any leadership roles, any mentorship activities, certainly research, and certainly publications if you're able to be a co-author on any manuscript that summarize the research work. And then again, clinical exposure, and better yet, clinical experiences. A subset of applicants will be granted an interview, and even though many medical schools are still doing virtual interviews, don't take them lightly. Know that eyes are on you, and eyes are on you not just during the interview, but also in preparation for the interview, how you interact with members of the admissions office. Are you polite? Are you cordial? Are you demanding with members of the admissions team? All of those tidbits, how you comport yourself with not just faculty or student interviewers, but how you comport yourself with staff. Everything matters. Eyes are on you. And so to summarize again, how you build your portfolio for medical school application is comprised or summarized in the AMCAS application, the interview, your letters of recommendation. One of the things that I will say is that it is important to have good relationships with your pre-health advisors. I know that pre-health advisors come in different shapes and sizes and can contribute meaningfully, and unfortunately, in some situations, may not contribute much guidance. But many a school will rely on those pre-health advisors to generate a committee letter, and a letter from someone who knows you well, from individuals or a group that are committed to advocating for you, is going to fare you better than if somebody's looking at your materials and basically summarizing your work. You want to be able to allow your letter writers to have that personal touch, and so it's important for them to know you. In this slide, I just cover the different milestones or time points during the medical school application process. I said at the opening of my comments that you would do well to start building your portfolio for application to medical school from day one of undergrad. In the year that you apply, I would say that you need to start engaging and preparing to work on your application no later than January, so that you're ready to drop your application by late May when the application season opens. I'm not going to go through all of these time points, but you would do well to drop your application early. Technically, for many schools, they'll accept applications through October, but I'll tell you that at my institution, by early August, there were already over 7,000 applications in. So yes, technically the deadline is October, but you would do well to have your application ready, locked and loaded by the end of May. I don't have updated statistics for the class of 2025. These days, information sharing is getting a little bit more sensitive, but I call your attention to the fact that that we at Weill Cornell see about 7,500. I'm sure for this last cycle, it was over 8,000 applications. About 10% of those individuals get an interview, and our class size is approximately 106. Now, you will see that the median MCAT score is 518, and that might freak you out. But I call your attention to the fact that there's a range. Anywhere, I believe it's 510 or 511 through 520. Similarly, the median GPA is a 3.9, but there's a range. And so I caution anyone who would look at this slide and say, I won't bother applying to Cornell. Certainly, the stronger your academic metrics are, the better, the stronger you are as a candidate, but I wouldn't disqualify yourself. You just need to be able to communicate in a compelling way what, besides your academic metrics, you bring to the table. And so to summarize, I would say apply early in the application cycle. Take full advantage of the pre-health advisors, not just in January of the year that you want to apply, but early on in your undergraduate tenure. Starting the application process early so that you can cross your T's and dot your I's. If you're not ready in terms of your GPA or ready to take the MCAT or are not sufficiently well-rounded, then you would do well to take a gap year or 2 or 3, some even take 4. And don't be afraid to speak to any academic challenges you may have experienced. And in particular, if you can demonstrate an upward trajectory in your GPA and speak cogently to what you have learned from the academic challenges, you would do well. Now, I have a lot more slides, but I'm inclined to stop here and start taking some questions.
So, circling back to that first question we had, what programs does Cornell offer for undergraduate students interested in attending Cornell?
We have several. Marco, who is on this program, was a participant in our summer research fellowship. That is a now 57-year-old program for undergrads, specifically juniors and seniors interested in a career in medicine. The application window for travelers opened on November 5th, I believe it was, and I am going to drop host. I'm not sure if everyone
I'm
can
gonna
see.
drop it in there.
Okay. But I'm dropping the website address for the Summer Research Fellowship in the chat. Would encourage you all to apply. This is our institutional pathway program for individuals who are MD bound. But if there are any aspiring MD, PhD students, we have another program called Gateways to the Laboratory. This is for aspiring MD, PhD students. And similarly, both of these programs are summer programs that start early to mid June. So Gateways runs for 9 weeks, Travelers runs for 7 weeks in the summer. The focus for both of these programs is an experiential research training, but we also try to accomplish some didactic education around healthcare disparities and important issues that plague the health of the nation. So professional development, career panel discussions, as well as some shadowing opportunities. We also have programs for high school students. I mentioned that Aspire was the institution's first and only post-bac program. That program is not active right now, but I am seeking funding to bring it back online.
Thank you. The next question asks, what is the typical path for a first-generation non-traditional student to study medicine?
I'm not sure that I understand the question, but what I imagine is that for individuals who come from a first generation or non-traditional background, that because you may not have an uncle in the business, so to speak, you may not have people close to you who can guide you. It's fora like these where you gather your information. And I would say to any first gen student, taking advantage of sessions like these to make sure that you are a well-rounded applicant at the time that you submit your application. And the gap years are where you can fill in the blanks or strengthen the areas that you're weak on. If it's academic enhancement, that may mean taking a post-baccalaureate program during your gap years to bring up your science GPA to help you study for the MCAT. If you were, a nerd in undergrad, you've got your academic deliverables, but you didn't engage in any community service and you have no research experience, or you have no clinical exposure, then you can use your gap years to fill in the areas that you're weak on. I'm not sure if I've answered that question to Willie's satisfaction. All right, Willie, you can follow up if I haven't. The next question that I see is, how are 3 MCAT tests seen by admissions offices? And I would say that when you've seen one medical school, you've seen one medical school. And it's hard for me to lump all medical schools and all admission offices into one bucket. But just as there are different tiers for undergraduate institutions, there are different tiers, different levels of competitiveness for medical schools and thus their admissions offices. AMSAR will allow you to see how your metrics compare to matriculating students with respect to MCAT and GPA. I am sure that schools that are highly competitive, I imagine, let me rephrase that. I withdraw the statement, I am sure, but I imagine that schools that are highly competitive would not look favorably on 3 MCAT tests. However, if you've taken 3 and you are able to demonstrate an upward trend in your score, you can communicate that and work that to your advantage. But without a meaningful increment, I think the most competitive schools would probably view it not favorably. But there's a range of schools, and schools have different ranges of MCAT and GPA. And so I would say that for any applicant, once you have built out and rounded out your portfolio, you would do well to see how you compare to the matriculating students. And you would want to certainly include in your list of schools, reach or aspirational schools, schools that you think you are well suited for, and then some safeties, some schools where you would say, I'd rather go to this school than not go to medical school at all. To that anonymous writer, I hope I answered that question. How would one be able to get shadowing opportunities if you're older than the average student? Certainly, if there are pathway and pipeline programs at the institutions that are close to you, you could make inquiries there. I would say another route, certainly the route that many take at my institution, is to become a volunteer. Now, when you become a volunteer, you're going to get assigned to wherever the needs are. Sometimes you get to say, I want to work with children in pediatrics, or I want to work in the emergency department. I think if I had to advise someone, you'd probably see a lot more clinical fodder serving as a volunteer in an emergency room than you might, for example, in pediatrics. Because if you get assigned to child life, you might be spending time with patients, but not necessarily getting exposed to any clinical decision making. Now, when you're a volunteer, no one can guarantee that you're going to get clinical exposure. But from most of the students that I've interacted with, when they volunteer in the emergency room, it's hard to be sheltered from some of the clinical action. I see a question, what would you advise those in gap years to do? Again, there's no one size fits all response to that question. If you go back to what constitutes a well-rounded and strong medical school applicant, it starts with your academic deliverables, your citizenship, which is your service in your school, your community service, your leadership, mentorship, your clinical exposure or experience, and research experience. And so if there's an area, if there's a facet of your application portfolio that's weak, that's where I would concentrate one's energy during the gap years. Now, there are going to be times where, depending on one's social and financial standing, you just have to work to put food on the table, to help pay the rent. And if that is your narrative, lean into that narrative and convey that on your applications. But you want to be able to articulate, to communicate why your chosen experiences or how your chosen experiences in your gap years fashion you into a stronger medical student. So someone is writing, how would you recommend going about getting research activities? It's become 10 times more difficult to get into. Amen. Especially in calendar year 2025, especially in light of the socio-political climate, especially in light of the drastic and crazy cuts in funding to the NIH. Paid research opportunities are harder to come by. In my institution, we had a hiring freeze. So investigators had grants promised from the NIH. So theoretically, they had money to spend, but the institution, because that money wasn't flowing from the NIH, we had a strict hiring freeze. And so PIs could not hire research techs to execute the research work. Fortunately, institutions are entering into agreements with the government that would allow the funds to start flowing. But if you can afford it financially, my suggestion would be begin by volunteering, not to jeopardize your academic metrics, not to jeopardize any employment, but begin by volunteering. And then if you demonstrate for a strong performance, if you can find yourself well regarded by the PI, when opportunities present themselves, they may be more open to saying, hey, Christina, I want you to take on this paid position working for me. I'm just going to move down. So someone's written, because going straight through has become less common, what distinguishes a successful applicant who chooses that path, and how can I communicate readiness effectively in my applications or interview? I come back to spending your gap years wisely, strengthening the areas or the facets of your application where you are weak, and being able to speak to how working as a scribe or how working as a research technician informs the type of physician you want to become. And by that, I don't mean I want to be an endocrinologist or I want to be an OBGYN. What did you learn from that? What did you learn about academic medicine that is going to help you be a stronger medical student? What did you learn about clinical medicine that's going to fashion you into a stronger physician? It isn't a one size fits all, but you have to be able to leverage the activities you've engaged in and able to say, this is how I'm going to use this experience to inform the type of student and the type of physician I want to become. So someone has asked, do you have to be a current student to sign up for the program? Certainly for the Summer Research Fellowship, you have to be enrolled as an undergraduate student or enrolled as a post-bac student at the time that you apply to the program. So seniors, individuals who will be out of college in May can apply to travelers, but one has to be in an undergraduate or post-bac program in order to apply to the Summer Research Fellowship. Someone has written, if I have a GPA of around 3.4 to 3.6, is it worth applying to Weill Cornell? I would never say don't try, but I would say if Cornell is high on your list of dream schools, then you might want to consider retaking some science classes to bump your science GPA, or doing a post-bac to bump your GPA. I cannot quote the number, but we have several students whose undergraduate GPAs were in the neighborhood of 3.5, who did a post-bac, were able to bump their science GPA, and now they're students at our school. Someone's asking about a specific activity, being a camp counselor count as community service. Service is activities that you're engaging for the benefit of someone else without any benefit or secondary gain to you. So if it's paid employment, then it wouldn't count. If it's volunteerism, then yes, it would count. And one thing that I would say about all of the extracurriculars, all of the different facets, sometimes people catch the notion that I just want to make my list of extracurriculars super long. I've been doing this for 3 months and doing that for 4 months and doing that for 6 months. I would say quality is higher than quantity. If you've been a camp counselor for 5 years, that matters more than if you volunteer at a hospital for 6 months. Any longitudinal activities that you can cogently speak to what you've learned, what you've taken away, how you are sensitized to needs of certain communities is better than just racking up what might be considered brownie points.
Dr. Howell, can I just add two things? So all of the summer programs, we get so many messages from various programs that want us to promote it. And I would say we probably on our Instagram account alone, I think we promote anywhere between 5 to 10 programs a week. Whenever they send us, we'll forward it. Next week, we also have someone who basically has these paid summer clinical programs that you could show up to next week and find out. And those are all paid, and I think they pay like $22 an hour or something. So we try to do a lot of those and send that information out. I mean, somebody like Marco is very biased because he was in the Cornell program this summer, and he says it was the best, but there's other programs as well that are available. So yes, there's been a lot of cutbacks, but very
There-
smart people are trying to make him work.
Yes, and we have 25 spots in travelers. I've already shared with you that uh, we had 8,000 applicants to our medical school this year. No one institution can provide opportunities to all of the individuals who are interested. But what I would say is you do well to be hungry and to get on the AAMC website. The schools that engage with your pre-health counselors, the schools that you're most interested in, look up on their websites. Do they have pathway or capacity building programs? There are lots of opportunities out there for those who are most hungry and prepared to do the legwork. I would hazard a guess. I don't want to put Marco on the spot, but I would hazard a guess that Travelers was not the only program that he applied to, nor should it be for anybody. You never want to put all your eggs in one basket.
Marco could answer that.
It was
How many did you apply to?
I applied to 5.
How many did you get into, if you don't mind me asking?
Just Cornell, but I would have made that choice anyways because it was the best on the list.
Okay.
So that's 20. What is it? I think the quote that my favorite quote is, "You miss 100% of the chances you don't take," and that was said by
You
Michael
meant to
Jordan.
that.
So
You meant to that.
if Marco had a 20% return. So if you could sit here and say, "Well, it's just going to be too hard," and there's only 25 spots. Yes, it's very competitive, but you get 100% rejections if you don't apply, and most people apply to multiple programs and hope for the best. And this
Yeah.
is wonderful thing in life that you take shots.
Yeah. Um, uh, I'm not sure. I'm sharing. We have an annual pre-med conference. It's scheduled for December 6th. I'm not sure if all of the spots are taken, but I've put the flyer in the chat. That's another opportunity to hear from medical students, both MD, MD, PhD, from our admissions office, from our financial aid office. Some of the same information I've shared, but you get to hear more nuanced discussion from our students about how to prepare for med school. Would Cornell ever take a resident application from a DO school for pediatric residency? I would say that yes is the answer to the question. The reality is that there are certain GME programs that are DO friendly or international medical graduate friendly, and others who are not. Now, the truth is, at Weill Cornell, probably it's somewhere around 10 to 15% of our residents come from DO schools. That's up from zero 20 years ago. So if you are a graduate from an allopathic school, it's more likely that you would get into our pediatric residency. But it's not, but that doesn't mean that DOs shouldn't apply. And across the country, in every state and every city, there are some programs that are more friendly to DO students, and one would just do well to know the landscape of the programs that you're applying to. But I would never tell a DO student, don't comply, don't even try. What was the consensus of med school students for how they studied for the MCAT? Again, it's not one size fits all. Different humans have different learning styles, different humans. Some people do better with content review. Some people do better with repeated test taking. I would say it's important to take diagnostics. And I've heard our learning specialists say more important than a particular resource is how you use the resource. But general statements that I would make is to make a schedule, stick to that schedule, like if your life depended on it, and have built into that schedule diagnostic exams so that you know that you're ready or you're in the neighborhood of your target score at the time that you purchase your seat for your exam. In general, people tend to perform better on the diagnostics than they do on the actual MCAT. And so to me, that question is a little bit too broad to answer in a session like this, but I would say you would do well to map out a plan, map out a schedule, and stick to that schedule religiously. And build in some fudge time for days where you have a headache or you just don't feel like studying, but you've got to work at studying, work at preparing for the MCAT like you would a job. And one of the things that I'm sure Marco has heard me say, I don't know if or that the MCAT was designed to be the single biggest barrier to getting into medical school, but the reality is the MCAT is the single biggest barrier to getting into medical school, in my opinion. Respect the exam. Someone's asking, are there major requirement differences for MD versus MD PhD students? I would say absolutely positively. MD PhD applicants are aspiring physician scientists, and so they are expected to have a few thousand, like 2,000 or 3,000 hours of research experience under their belt by the time they apply to medical school. 3,000 might be a bit much, but you definitely have to be engaged meaningfully and deeply in research, not just casual research that I did with a professor during my organic chemistry class in undergrad, but usually for the MD, PhD applicants, their gap years is occupied by full-time research for a year or two. Someone's asked for community college students transferring to a four-year college impact the application timeline. There's no dead, if the question is about is the application cycle any different for a transfer student, the answer to that question is no. I would say there's no age cutoff. There are people who were lawyers or who had whole careers before they pivoted and switched to medicine. So you should apply to medical school when you're ready, when you have a well-rounded application, not sticking to a specific time frame. I'm not sure if I've done that question justice. Someone's asking what GPA would I say is a cutoff and the need to do a post-bac. Quite honestly, depending on the schools that you're interested in. And again, different medical schools have different ranges for MCAT and GPA scores that they are that characterize their matriculants. So if your dream school has an average or median GPA or median MCAT score that's higher than what you want, then is when I would say you need to do some academic enhancement. I would say for a school like Cornell, if it's below a 3.6, I would do a post-bac. Or if you're not going to do a formal post-bac, which costs money, and I recognize that that's not easy, then at the very least, if you've underperformed in any of the science classes, you need to retake those science classes. And recognize that when you retake a science class, the initial grade doesn't go away. The two grades are averaged. And so that's why I asked earlier on how many of the attendees are first years and second years. One has to start preparing your med school application portfolio from day one of undergrad. And if you didn't know until you got to third year that you wanted to do medicine, that's not a crime. Taking a gap year is not a crime, but you want to make sure you have a well-rounded, strong application. I see a question from Adesua Carlton, a name I recognize. What are ways to find a gap year position working as a medical assistant or a place with direct patient care experience that's also paid? Um, I would say come hungry. So you could work as an EMT, you could work as a scribe, you could work as a medical assistant. All of these are paid clinical patient-facing experiences that at Cornell we would characterize as clinical experience. And so it requires knocking on the doors of the various hospitals that are in your area to find out what kind of positions are available. Patient care coordinators, people who do patient intake in a clinical practice. Now that's not going to provide you with the same exposure to some of the medicine that work as a medical assistant would provide you. But it does bring you into proximity into the clinical space. And there's no kind of cookie cutter, one size fits all to the type of work that you can do to give you clinical exposure. But I would say that consider being an EMT, consider being a scribe, consider being a medical assistant.
Yeah, and I think we did a whole workshop, 2-hour workshop about things you could do. The first thing you need to have to be in a clinical setting, you need to have a CPR card, which is for healthcare providers, and you can get that in 4 hours anywhere in the country. And I think it's called the BLS for healthcare workers. And to get into a facility, you need to have at least, I could tell you from California, you need to have some sort of certification for you to touch patients in a hospital setting. But like I could tell you the best jobs that I would want to have if I didn't have any training, patient escort, patient transport. You only need to have a CPR, and you basically get a badge and you move patients around. They give you these little message keyboards, and you basically say, take patient X from med surg to CT and back, and that's a really good way to get in, to get into a hospital and work there. But you know, you need to take that action, and it goes back to the whole taking, you know, shots. Is you need to have those tools to get in, and the EMT program is 6 months, and some places you could do MA work without being licensed, but now more and more they're requiring that certification. So and like I said, we did a whole 2-hour talk about things you could do. There are various jobs that are out there. Like I know someone who was really interested in women's health, she um and she was from the Latino community, so she became a doula, and she's fluent in Spanish. So she is now a doula in a Hispanic serving hospital in the East Bay, and she does that and goes to, I think she's now graduated, but she's doing that in her gap year. So um,
Thank you. I saw a question about letters of recommendation, and is there a particular weight given to STEM research versus humanities non-STEM research? I think it depends on the institution. In general, there's probably a little bit of a bias towards STEM research, but more important than how technical or how sexy the science is, what did you learn from it? And how the experience informs or sensitizes you to a healthcare need on the part of some segment of the US population. And in addition, the participants in the Summer Research Fellowship have probably heard me say that publications are the currency of academia. And so if you're engaged in humanities, non-STEM research that you're passionate about, and you are can be a co-author on a publication, that's going to help you. Sometimes people pursue basic science or bench research just to check a box, and they don't love it, and they can't answer the so what question. Why should anybody care about this research? Any research that you do, whether it's humanities or STEM, you need to be able to speak to the research question and be able to cogently communicate why anybody should care about that research. And if you were just along for the ride and can't give a cogent explanation, that is going to hurt you. I'm seeing a question about clinical research programs for those who are not currently in school. At Weill Cornell, we don't. But I would say that that particularly at academic institutions, there are clinical translational science centers, or CTSCs. There are, or if you could get a link to the human resources page. So anybody who is interested in clinical research positions at Cornell, the main way to know about all the offerings is to go through the HR portal. And I imagine that that would be the same for any institution. But to the question of, do we have any pathway programs for individuals who are not currently in school? Unfortunately, we don't. I'm seeing a question that leaves me a little bit confused. I would invite the author to perhaps unmute and clarify. Do you have any recommendations for pre-med students to prepare for medical school while they're still in undergrad? I would be inclined to say everything that I just said in the past hour. But if there's a nuance to that question that I'm missing, feel free to ask aloud. So, this is a nuanced question. Does your undergrad university choice matter to your medical school application? Should you choose a more prestigious school in hopes of it looking better on your application? The reality is that if you go to a prestigious undergrad that has some name recognition, that might help you a little bit. but more important than going to a sexy undergrad institution is how well you perform. So if you go to a high-powered institution, let's say a large university where you are lost in the crowd, and don't necessarily have the supports that you need to do well, and you have a 3.4 GPA from Harvard versus a 3.8 GPA from, let's say, Davidson College, which is a small undergraduate institution, that doesn't have the same name recognition as Harvard. I think the higher GPA from a smaller school will net fare you better. Um, um, I want to give a nuanced response. I'm not saying that school reputation and the prestige of a school don't matter. In fact, they do. But what matters more is how well you do in your school than how much bling your school has attached to it. So someone's writing that they have a GPA, undergrad GPA of 3.1, um, um, but A's and B's in the science courses, that would suggest to me that the science GPA is higher, did an MPH and had a 3.9. The reality is that the AAMC website would allow you to plug in your master's science classes and plug in your undergrad science classes and calculate a science GPA. And so overall GPA does matter, but your science GPA matters more. And what schools are doing with that information is trying to make a prediction as to whether or not you can handle the rigor of medical school. And so if you can knock it out of the park with your undergrad or post-bac science classes, then schools can be more comfortable that you'll be able to handle the rigor of med school. Somebody's saying that their MCAT score was not satisfactory, but the rest of their application is strong. I would, you could wait back to hear from medical schools, but I would go ahead and make a plan to retake the exam. The reality is it's November, and for example, at Cornell, we interview through February and start notifying accepted students toward the beginning of March. I think the longer you get into the season without an interview, the less likely it is that you'll be selected for an interview. And if you already know that your MCAT score is not competitive, then I would say, yes, it's wise to start working toward retaking it, but making sure that you have a realistic schedule and that you do diagnostics to make sure that when you retake it, your score, you're going to get a higher score. Because retaking it and getting a score in the same neighborhood doesn't add much value.
Yeah, somebody in our group had a 510 and she was adamant about taking it again and she got a 505 the second time. That's not a good progression. You want to do better.
Amen to that. Somebody is saying, how important is it to have an LOR from a PI you completed research with who's not aiming for an MD, PhD? I would say it's always good to have a research letter. If you did research, it's always good to have at least one research letter in your portfolio of letters. And one thing that I didn't say earlier, is that you don't just want a ho-hum letter. You just don't want a meh letter. You need to ask Dr. Twiggs for time on her calendar. You need to go to her office. You need to look her in the eyeball. You need to ask Dr. Twiggs, give me some feedback on my performance in your laboratory. Am I someone that you would want to remain a member of your research team? And if they hold you in high regard, then you want to look them in the eyeball and say, would you be willing to write me a strong letter of recommendation? You don't just want a letter, you want a strong letter of recommendation. I have, as in my time as fellowship program director, I still participate in residency interviews. There were a series of years that I was on the medical school's admissions committee. I have read way too many thousands of letters of recommendation, and it is easy to spot when somebody's just doing it to say, I did the letter, versus when they're really going to bat for that applicant. You don't just want a letter, you want a strong letter of recommendation. And then when that person says yes, then you better be ready to drop a personal statement and a CV, and you want to give people at least a month's notice. Busy people need time to incorporate letters into their workflow. And I find it disrespectful if you give me less than a month's notice. Disrespectful.
Without supporting documentation, like
Yeah.
your CV, your bio, your transcripts. We actually did a workshop about how to ask for a good letter of recommendation.
Yeah. You want to have those things ready. So that if the person says yes, you can say booyah. You don't want them to be ready to write the letter and then chasing you down for the materials. There's a young lady who's applying to college who did one of our high school programs. I said yes 2 months ago, and I got the personal statement last week and the CV this week, and the letter's due next week. I'm going to write the letter, but that's not a good look. So someone has asked, what makes a letter of recommendation glowing? And are there tips to help form relationships that can hopefully lead to such glowing aspects? Again, you want to get letters from people who hold you in high regard, people who are willing to go to bat for you. In general, that means they need to know you. So if it's a professor, show up at office hours. Don't just show up for brownie points, but like be engaged in the work, ask thoughtful questions. If it's someone you're doing research with, bring your A game to the work. Um, go beyond, deliver the extra mile, and uh, be curious. Be curious about why, Dr. Daytuin, why did you choose to get started with this line of research? What makes you passionate about XYZ line of research? What are the next steps that you're envisioning? Get to know that person. I'm not saying feign interest or fake curiosity, but in general, relationship building is a two-way street. And you need to be interested, be curious about the people you're working with, and often that will be reciprocated. And what I tell the traveler students when they are paired up with research PIs, most of our students are not going to be applying the same summer that they're participating in the program. And so they may be reaching back a year later to their research mentor. Now, you don't want that PI's recollection of you to fade over the course of the year. So I tell our students to just send communications at regular intervals, maybe every couple of months. Forget-me-nots, that's what I call them. So, hey, Dr. Twiggs, happy Thanksgiving. How's things with the family? Some warm fuzzies. And Happy New Year, Dr. Twiggs. Hope the year goes well for you. I'm thinking about working on my medical school application. I'm going to keep you posted. I literally call them forget-me-nots.
Yeah, they say you at least should do 2 to 3 a year.
Is it okay not to do a program over the summer and just work as an MA? Again, I would say individuals applying to medical school need to be well-rounded in order to be strong applicants. And so if you've got research experience and you don't need a summer research program, but you need clinical exposure, then it makes all the sense in the world to forego a summer research experience and gain that clinical experience working as an MA. But the real answer to that question has to be customized. What does your portfolio as an applicant look like? What are your strong suits? What are your weak suits? And making sure that you choose activities that are going to strengthen your weak areas. As an MD PhD student, acceptable to include high school experiences. I would say if there are leadership roles, or if there are community service activities that you started as a high school student and continue into undergrad, your high school activities become less relevant by the time you're applying to medical school. So are experiences that are not pre-med, like student government, still of value if you have leadership and it's over years? Absolutely, positively.
You also have to understand if you're someone who is not someone that could stand up and give a speech in front of people, there's different types of leaders. And so if your leadership is not in that, then don't do that. Do something else. I would tell you the most valuable people we have on our team is the people that make our flyers and have the graphic skills that could do it. If you ask me to do any of that, it would basically be sticks and drawing, basically just sticks. But the people that do that, they have those talents that bring that in and do that. And so there's all types of leadership that you can do. Student government, sure. If you think that, there needs to be something, by all means do it. But there's different kinds of leaders and different kinds of talents that we all bring to the table. On our team, the people that do all our videos, that edit them and cut them and put them out, like I can't do any of that stuff. Like I could barely use my phone camera. So you have to be able to do all of those things that you're talented at and you know excel at those things and also be uncomfortable as well.
I'm seeing a question from Ariana about if someone is well endowed when it comes to clinical hours, is it worth stressing over research experience? I think that that's an excellent question. One doesn't necessarily need to to uh, be strong in research and strong in clinical exposure. I do think it would be helpful to have some research experience so that you understand what it is to take a clinical curiosity or a curiosity and formulate a hypothesis and go about testing said hypothesis. So that you know how to formulate a research question. It's important to have some sense of the value and the utility of research in the academic spaces, but you don't have to have 2,000 hours of research to match your 2,000 hours of clinical experience. What's the one thing you would tell your younger self during the med school application process? So the truth is, by virtue of the fact that I attended an MD, a BSMD program, I did not take the MCAT. And I was accepted into this 7-year program straight out of high school. And for me and my family, that was a deliberate calculation rather than the wild card of the MCAT and college and medical school tuition. It worked for me. The one thing that I would tell, like if any of you were my child, I've said it already. If you are aspiring to become a physician, you have to start working on building your portfolio from day one of undergrad. That way, you position yourself to take a gap year if you feel like it, as opposed to you have to. And you can use, if you do choose to take a gap year, you can use it to mature and ready yourself. Sometimes undergrad is a butt kicker, and people just need a mental health break before they jump into the rigor of medical school. Um, uh, but I would say the process of getting into and readying oneself for medical school is an arduous one. And so you would do well to start early. Someone's writing to say if they had remote or distant research experience, and it's probably not practical to get a letter of recommendation, would I recommend getting more recent research experience? Um, I I I wouldn't say so. I would make sure that if someone is no longer attached to an academic center, doesn't necessarily have access to research experiences, um, you could get a job doing research, like a clinical research assistant or a research associate, or you could get employment that provides some clinical exposure. The fact that one is a career changer would be to me, a logical explanation for why there isn't any current research. But I would want to make sure that the more proximal activities are in some way, shape, or form gonna contribute to the different facets of the med school application process. So if you did research back then, I think it's fine to leave it back then, as long as the clinical and the leadership and the community service and so forth are more current. So someone is asking about a do-it-yourself post-bac at a community college. And again, once you've seen one medical school, you've seen one medical school. And different schools have different philosophies. Some schools don't hold science classes at community college in high regard at all. And if the question is, how does Cornell look upon students doing a DIY post-bac at a community college? I would say you would be better served doing those same classes at a more traditional or more rigorous undergrad institution for our school. Now, does that apply to every school? No. But our school is one that doesn't regard science classes at community colleges. Somebody asked, how did it feel being done with residency by 30? Residency is a butt kicker. I don't know that being on the younger side helped me that much. It was a butt kicker.
I know
Some,
all of our residents, after they're done, they take like a month or 2 months vacation before they start their jobs.
yeah. Someone anonymously is saying, I feel like a failure. People around me in the same science classes already graduating med school next year, and I'm still applying for it. Like I said in response to an earlier question, there's no deadline for any one person to be applying to medical school. I would say that if one needs to take a post-bac program, to add some structure, sometimes post-bac programs, particularly those that are affiliated with medical schools, particularly those that have linkage programs. Sometimes it's not just the academic enhancement, but they're providing you with support and resources that help fashion you into stronger students, stronger applicants for medical school. So I would say, if you're doing it yourself and struggling, and it's taking a long time, to pause and zoom out and reassess and figure out, might you be better served by doing a post-bac program, particularly one that has some resources attached to it.
And the only thing is, I would just say, do you. I mean, other people may have different circumstances, and you got to live your life. You can't change the past or people around you. You're gonna get older every day, but also you need to do what you love to do and what you want to do, rather than don't live other people's expectations and dreams. And social media is not real life, so just throw that
Social
out there.
media is completely contrived. There's a question about virtual experiences during the pandemic versus in-person activities. I would say, given that it's 2025 and things began opening up around 2022, you certainly want to, I wouldn't lean on just virtual experiences. I would try to have more current in-person experiences. Those were, in 2022, if you were applying in 2023 and all you had were virtual experiences, like, we get it. Everything was locked down, but it's been, things have been opened up for a few years now that I would, if I was reading an application that only referenced virtual experiences from 3 years ago, I would wonder, what has this individual been doing since? Someone asked about university extension programs. I would imagine, I'm not sure, but I would imagine that a university extension program would be held in higher regard than a community college science class.
Yeah, those are really big on the West Coast, like UCLA has it, Berkeley has it, San Diego, Santa Cruz, everybody has one now. And they're basically open enrollment classes that you could take, and it costs a little bit more than regular units, but that's an option some people are using.
Someone asked, how can we highlight our passions, hobbies, interests in our application outside of STEM and not reflected in our transcript or formal experiences? I would say, I think I talked about experiences and attributes. Like, if you're on the soccer team, talk about it. If you are in a dance troupe, talk about it, particularly if you've been engaged in these activities longitudinally. Anything team-based cultivates you. Medicine, healthcare is a team sport. So if you've been on a team, working with people toward a shared goal, supporting other people, having a specific role, there are some lessons, life lessons that you learn as a member of a team that you can't get if you are not a member of a team or group activity. So talk about all of those things. Someone's asking about medical school applicants with health issues. Will it affect their eligibility? You know, life happens. Sometimes during undergrad, an individual student will have health issues or a family member will have health issues. I would, in general, be careful and be judicious about how much you share. Sometimes it's a lived experience that is provoking someone to pursue a career in medicine. But you want to make sure that if it's a chronic condition, that what you share doesn't leave room for someone to invoke that medical condition is going to interfere with your ability to handle the rigor of medical school. So that can be kind of a double-edged sword. If it's a one-time illness that is now resolved, then you could probably leverage that pretty easily. If it's a chronic illness with relapsing and remitting course and might interrupt or interfere with medical school, I would be judicious. Someone's asking about military experience. I think most medical schools don't want cookie cutter classes where everybody's a science geek or everybody's a pre-med. Our school prides itself on a well-rounded student body where we have some philosophy majors and some music majors and some history majors and some career changers. And so if you've got military experience, that is experience that I would imagine can be very strategically leveraged to point out how you stand out from the others and what does life in the military teach you about teamwork, about shared goals, about committing to something bigger than yourself. That can be very easily, easy for me to say. That can be, I can think of multiple ways those experiences can be leveraged.
Duty, honor, being part of a team, following command structure. And medicine does have a command structure.
Yeah, there's hierarchy in medicine. It's not always good, it's not always fair, not something that we're always proud about, but there is a hierarchy in healthcare. But there are other aspects of military service, like contributing to a greater good,
Mission driven.
prioritizing the needs of the unit or the needs of your comrades over yourself. Those things can be leveraged. So someone's asking about shadowing opportunities. This came up before. I would say any hospitals in a reasonable distance from where you go to school or where you live. The way to get your foot in the door is as a volunteer. That would be where I would start in terms of looking for shadowing opportunities. And then if you're working in child life, you might be bumping elbows with pediatricians, or if you're working in the emergency department as a volunteer, you could say to Dr. Renteria, hello, Dr. Renteria, I've been a volunteer here for 6 months. I'm thinking about pre-med. Can I shadow you one day? It's a foot in the door. But you gotta hustle.
You gotta get that badge and clear to be in the hospital. Let's ask 2 more questions and then I have to actually start work. So
And I'm taking a course outside of my professional life, and I have a paper due Monday, so
oh.
I got some homework to do.
Whenever I
Right.
have to write a paper, I crumble like a ball in the corner of the room and shake.
Mhm. I'm seeing a question, what path is recommended for someone with a struggling past and present? This question gives me the opportunity to acknowledge that there are many who have aspirations toward medicine, and medicine might not be right for everyone. And there comes a point, or there may come a point, where one has to zoom out and reflect and think about the opportunity costs. And there are lots of meaningful areas of work that are medicine adjacent that people can engage in. I would never want to say, don't give it a try. Um, don't take the time it takes to take the time that it takes to fashion yourself into a strong medical school applicant. But I've known of individuals who are 7 and 8 and 10 years out from undergrad, and they're in this vicious cycle with the MCAT, and not making progress and not getting any closer than where they were 2 years out from undergrad. In those circumstances, it might be wise to think about, is there something medical adjacent to medicine that I can do? Um, yeah. Somebody's asking about funding a nonprofit. I think any service, any community service, whether it's local to a community or national or global, if you can demonstrate that you've been committed to a cause that's bigger than yourself, that doesn't have anything to do with you, or maybe it does have something to do with you or your community, but you've been meaningfully committed to a cause, where beneficiaries are broader than you and your family member, I would say work it. And so if you've started a nonprofit, particularly if the nonprofit is still alive, because lots of people found clubs and organizations that kind of die off when the founder moves on. But if you founded an organization that's still alive, that is leadership. That is citizenship in my mind. In terms of demonstrating impact, in academic medicine and science, we're fond of numbers. So if you have any quantitative statistics, like, I founded PreMedCC in, 2020. We have X number of sessions per academic year that have X number of participants. Um, um, We've had X number of speakers. We have testimonials from people who've participated. The quantitative outcome metrics, as well as some qualitative, some testimonials, are ways to demonstrate impact.
All righty. Well, I need to get going, and Dr. Howell needs to write her paper and other things. And thank you again for coming tonight. And thank you for again. And George, by the way, texted and said hi.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
All right. Have a good evening, everyone, and I wish you all the best.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.